Let's talk tourism.
Glenn Jampol is one of the true originals in Costa Rica tourism, raised in California, then on to New York City to pursue a career in art. But in the 1980s, he and his wife, Terry, arrived in Costa Rica and soon thereafter founded Finca Rosa Blanca, one of the region's first truly boutique, unique hotels and sustainable coffee plantations. He's a passionate advocate for sustainability, and nearly 4 decades on, he and his wife still live on property and manage their operations together. Glenn, let's talk tourism.
Okay, thank you, Casey. It's great to be here and see you again, even though it's digitally.
I know it's been too long. Please take us all the way back. When and how did you get your start in tourism?
Well, I went to Berkeley in the late 60s. I was a tree hugger and, a little bit of a farmer too. I always had this idea of like doing it right, but I wasn't very well trained or informed. And simultaneously in the early 80s, my wife, Terry, who's my partner also, we decided to go somewhere new and ended up going to Costa Rica because our surfer friends and water people all said it's the best surfing and the best rafting and the most beautiful country. And we ended up coming here, putting our finger in the book of the travel agent, because this is pre-internet, pre-fax, pre-everything. Ended up staying in the Hotel Europa in San Jose for a night or two, went off to Tamarindo, which was a tiny little town with 2 hotels, the Diria and Cabinas Nogi, which is a really great, cool place. And we stayed there for 2 weeks, fell in love with the country, came back, had the best time, particularly the kindness and the warmth of the people here. And also their policy towards the environment and their politics was very attractive to both of us. I came back, told my mother, who had wanderlust, about it. She went like 2 weeks after I spoke to her, came back, had the same exact reaction that we did. And we decided together to buy a piece of land somewhere off the beaten track, but not deep into the jungle. And we ended up in the coffee highlands of Heredia. Found this, what had been a coffee farm turned into a motocross field, which for me was, as an artist, was like a blank canvas to start designing stuff. And in 1985, we began our project, Finca Rosa Blanca.
Awesome. You've been here a long time. Again, one of the true originals and pioneers in what you're doing. Running a hotel now is probably no easier than it was then, but the challenges are different. What were the challenges like 35 years ago, and what are the challenges today?
Well, 35 years ago, there were basically 2 types of hotels in the country. I mean, I'm generalizing a little, but I mean, to get a kind of an idea of what it was like for us, there were the business hotels along the route from the airport to San Jose, which was the Cariari, the Herradura. There was the Playboy Hotel, which was on the Savannah, and a few others. And they kind of modeled themselves after the Miami, hotels, a large scale, the biggest TV they could find in the room and that kind of thing. But they concentrated more than usual on, the quality of the beds and the linen and things like that. But they were business hotels. And then on the other end of the spectrum, with nothing in between really, were the mom and pop little jungle cabins that had the most beautiful landscape and environment with birds and rivers and the kindest people on the planet, and a real care and love for protecting what they had around them, and their appreciation for the biodiversity in the country. But they often were places that had like a concrete slab with a piece of foam on it and a light bulb hanging from a wire. And, the idea was you slept there and you ate a communal breakfast, lunch, and dinner in their lodge. And it wasn't about being inside, it was about going outside and exploring. So, which was wonderful. And one of the things that I fell in love with when I was here. But when we started to build Rosa Blanca, The idea was to take art and architecture and really great mattresses and bedding and create a kind of combination of the two using the coffee highlands, the coffee culture, and the incredible birds we have in the mountains here on the slopes of Barva volcano, and sort of combine them and create a new kind of niche that would incorporate both sides of the idea. And we fortunately, because we were so weird in the way we designed everything with no straight edges and lots of organic and tons of art, almost like a museum inside, because I'm an artist and my collection, my mother's collection, we just put everything in the hotel. We built all the windows, doors, furniture, everything ourselves on site. We had no idea what to do. I've never been a hotelier, and we just thought, well, we like this and maybe other people will. Right at the time we were about to open the hotel, Oscar Arias won the Nobel Prize for Peace Prize. And the journals and newspapers around the world went crazy, like, Costa Rica, where is this island? It's not an island, it's a country. But they started coming to Costa Rica. And the ICT, which had at that time a planificación, which was included the architecture and all of that kind of certification for hotels to get their declaratoria. They would tell the press that came there through the marketing department, well, you should go here and there and this. And also there's this really quirky little hotel that's only about 45 minutes from here. You could go see, because they have sort of a new idea, which was great for us. And we got a lot of press just because we were weird and different. And I wasn't complaining, because that was the only way you could really market that I knew of, was through newspaper articles and things like that. And when the New York Times came and did an article about us, and Costa Rica as well, during that period, I think it was 1989, we had just acquired at a huge expense a fax machine, but it was one of those things that looks like, it was like a tank. And our fax machine was just like on fire from all of the people who read the New York Times, who were sending us faxes about how do we stay at your place. And it was great for us. That's really how we kind of got going. Shortly thereafter, we realized we don't have access to things that we need, quality materials, sheet, foods, lots of things. And we were looking desperately to find others that were trying to do a similar kind of upscale boutique adventure travel place. A couple of years later, Lapa Rios, the people from Lapa Rios, John and Karen Lewis, showed up, and they were looking for a place to build Lapa Rios. They were trying to decide between Punta Arenas area up there and then where they are now in Puerto Jimenez. Jim DeMalis started Si Como No in 1993 or something like that. Casa Turire. There were a few places that were like in a similar vein as us. And our challenge was to just find goods and get to those people who had already been coming to Costa Rica for a really long time, adventurers, tree huggers, birders, people, PBS watchers from the US. And how do we get to them? That was our big challenge.
So if I can summarize, I guess the first half of the game, if that was most of the late 70s, most of the 80s, was Costa Rica was so disconnected economically, communications wise, even to some degree, flights and access. Compare that to the biggest challenges now, which are obviously very different. The connectivity, the knowledge of the traveler, the tastes, the globalization that has occurred, even in the last 5-7 years. What are the challenges, as someone who's been in the same location now for going on 4 decades, how do you compare that to the challenges you face now?
Well, in the early days, our main client, the vast majority of our client, were in two groups. One were the business clients that were just coming here to do business for whatever reasons. There were lots of, Zona Franca things. And the other side was the environmental adventurers, people who were looking to raft, to surf, to explore the jungles. And it was, a very strong, coercive group of people who appreciated the country as a jewel in the world for its biodiversity and its sensibility about the environment. And as we grew, the second, third, fourth, fifth tier of people started coming that had been maybe in some cases people who had gone to all-inclusive resorts in the Caribbean and were looking for something in Costa Rica as a new adventure that was similar. And the tourism community in some areas were attracted to that idea and were looking for larger volumes so that they could increase their revenues. But in my opinion, were completely obtuse to the idea of what Costa Rica's real niche was and how we could build that into a very strong, unique experience for travelers without going into the giant cruise ships or the 1,000-room hotels and all of that. So the challenge, I think, for me personally and for that group of people that I was involved with, who later became all the pioneers of ecotourism, was how do we continue to understand what the benefits and potential is for Costa Rica versus being seduced by volume tourism, mass tourism, all-inclusive tourism. Very fortunately, in the early 90s, 95 or 96, something like that, Carlos Roche, who was the Minister of Tourism, who had come from kind of a business, all-inclusive hotel career, realized that that was just not the right way for Costa Rica to go and kind of had a mental shift. And became, as Minister of Tourism, really insisted that we find a route that would be more sustainable for us in terms of biodiversity, and hired the Menlo Group to do a research about where we should go. And they also agreed and were very forceful about saying that sustainable tourism was the way Costa Rica should go. And so we had the certification process starting there with CST in about 95 or 96. Later, as we got into the 2000s, there was a lot more knowledge. We had younger people who were getting MBAs from Finca and other places who understood the numbers and how important data was to be able to market correctly what we had. And the ongoing problem of the all-inclusive versus the mom and pop, B&B idea was and still is always in conflict. But some of the larger hotels realized that sustainability was a really good marketing idea, and trying not to be greenwashers got involved with the CST or put themselves in a position to be more, to engage more in good practices and try to keep up with the Joneses, if you will.
What do you think we need to do to remain a leader in sustainable tourism? If you could wave a wand, where do you hope we go?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good question. I think, first of all, we have to understand the numbers. The global international arrivals between 2010 and 2019 grew at an annual growth rate, a compound annual growth rate of about 5%, which is huge. And it brought sustainable impacts, of course. Tourism is responsible for at least 10% of the carbon emissions in the world. So that's a substantial responsibility for us as a tourism sector globally. But sustainability, the word sustainability has been mentioned more and more and is part of the strategic plan and action plans for all tourism around the world, way more than it's ever been. And Costa Rica's always been a leader in that. And even if we haven't been a leader because there's a certain amount of hypocrisy and turning the other cheek for Costa Rica in terms of walking the walk or talking the talk, we still are perceived internationally as the most dedicated and evolved tourism sector and country tourism sector, and are looked up to as benchmark for this. From 2019 to 2020, there was an increase in data that revolved around sustainability all over the world. It's becoming a very important factor in tourism industry, which contributes over $9 trillion to the global economy. So it's a big business, and I think the most important thing for us is to understand that Costa Rica has this image, this profile, this reputation, which is very important in terms of leading the way. And because 90% of our hotels here, talking about the hotel part of our industry, are less than 40 rooms, that shows that a small hotel can be a viable hotel and still be responsible in terms of moving towards better practices in terms of carbon footprint, climate change, and other things. If we start as a country to think about big numbers, mass tourism, for me, that's the death knell. That's the end of Costa Rica's ability to compete. Because what we have is a particular niche that has a limit on how much we can absorb and how much income we can create, but can offer a huge, across the gamma, benefits for employment, for conservation, for progress. And I think that that's the biggest issue for us right now. And also, Casey, I think we need to change from the concept of sustainability now, because sustainability implies maintaining things. I think we need to change to the word regenerative, which means turning it back and actually increasing, like we have with green coverage, for instance, in the country.
Yeah, I mean, this is the notion of build back better, right? But it seems like, one of the challenges of being a sustainable operator is it costs more, right? I mean, making the right decisions is more expensive than cutting corners. I mean, we've had some hilarious incidents here over the years of giant hotels dumping their gray water on the next town.
Yeah.
So what seems to be missing is this, certainly in the financial news, we're hearing about all this incentives for the big banks and big business to make more ESG investments. Environmental, social governance, sustainable, building back better. But there seems to be some disconnect where the rubber hits the road regarding that money actually making it to these sustainable investments. So how do we bridge that gap? And also, who's going to certify that these investments are actually not greenwashed?
It's such a good question. And it's been a very, it has its impact in terms of what we're doing. One of the biggest questions about the CST has always been, after you get your CST, who's there to verify that you're continuing with all of the good works that you've done so far? And sustainable certification doesn't necessarily include traceability, transparency, and other things in between the periods of inspection and the delivery of the goods. And also, I believe that in order to create a strong, sustainable atmosphere, world in which to work and live, we need to have a win-win situation. We need to find solutions that not only are good for the planet and for our communities, but are also good for our finances. The first rule of sustainability should be financial sustainability, because if you're not making it, then you're not able to do any good anywhere. And there are things that products and many kinds of activities that are total win-win situation. To give you an idea, in our pool and some other pools here in the country, we use an ionization system, which costs us $300 a year to replace the copper silver anodes that create this system, which kills off all bacteria and algae in our pool. And there's no chlorine gases being emitted. There's no use of chlorine. And so for us to use chlorine in our pool would cost us about maybe $6,000 or $7,000 a year in just chlorine costs. And I'm only paying $300 a year to use my ionization anodes to clean our pool. And we've been using it since 1994, and it still works perfectly. So there are things like that, many other things. But unfortunately, in my opinion, the government of Costa Rica, and I'm a Costa Rican citizen, and so I have my say and I do my best, in particularly in the municipal area, that they don't understand that tourism is not the cash tree, that when they get in trouble, they seem to often go to tourism and say, you know what, we need some more money to pay for this and this and this, so we're going to put another tax on your income somehow, or we're going to use retención of your payments to travel agencies outside of Costa Rica, which is in essence another kind of tax. And when you're paying already 42 cents on the dollar for social services, which I believe in and I think are great and important, and I don't have any problems with that. But when you start adding all these other things onto it, it makes tourism very expensive. And it makes it expensive in comparison to other countries that may have a similar kind of biodiversity and offering in terms of experiences like Colombia. Mm-hmm. It makes it very difficult for us to experiment with improving things that will help the environment and our bottom line, because we have to pay so much extra just to survive. Right. So I believe we need more help from the government in offsetting some of the investments we make towards conservation tourism. And the market will determine who does it the best, but we need to have more innovation and creativity, which relies upon a certain amount of net income to allow you to continue to do your work.
Yeah, the most obvious missed opportunity, and you know way more about this than I do, seems to be solar. Maybe it's not always sunny in Heredia, but geez, in Guanacaste, in certain parts of the country, the sun just beats down, but the numbers just don't bear out. So what's the incentive for these hotels to put $100,000 solar array on their roof if they can't sell the energy back to the grid, if they're taxed at full for the purchase of that high-tech equipment, which here costs double what it does in developed countries? So in the end of the day, your accountant just goes, sorry, we're not doing it. If you do it, you're doing it out of the goodness of your heart, not because it makes any financial sense. So, how do we start aligning some of these things that make great sense for sustainability, plus great for the sustainable image of Costa Rica, but also make fiscal sense? I mean, are there other examples like that where you wish that the legislation would change?
Yeah, well, I think we need to have a very loud and strong representation as an industry in Costa Rica. And unfortunately, since the pandemic and even before the pandemic, in my opinion, we haven't had that. And we used to depend upon organizations like Canatur, later Canaeco, to be the voice for these kinds of things you just talked about. In terms of the solar energy industry, I think it's changing now for the better. There are offers for mis pymes, the small and medium hotels, to get their solar generation for electricity paid for by the banks. I think Banco San Jose is one that participates in this. And you pay what you would normally have paid monthly to the bank for electricity, and then after 2 or 3 years or whatever, you paid it off because you cut your electricity down so much. But we need a lot more incentives. Way back when I had the idea, and probably others had a similar idea, that if we could get a kind of state banking government plan, which I called, we're incentives, and I called it Incenso. That was the name of my plan, where the government would put developing properties on the top of the heap of papers to get approved if they did it well and correctly, so they could get into operations more rapidly and thus save themselves a lot of money on interest to the banks and other things. If and when they had a development project based on responsible tourism, which would include a lot of the sustainability apparatus that we need to see for this to happen, so that instead of 9 months waiting for permits for this or that, they'd get them in 2 months, could get things going faster, and could open their businesses quicker, thus lowering their monthly nut. And all they would have to do is build into their plans a strong, sustainable, or regenerative strategy. These kinds of innovations and incentives would help immensely for the building and developing of new tourism ideas that were based on good practices, and would allow them a little bit preferential treatment because they committed and promised to continue that kind of development.
It's a great idea. I like to ask everybody about the challenges and pitfalls of being a touristic operator. And obviously it's fun for us to commiserate, particularly in tough times like we've all just been through. But obviously nearly 40 years on, there's something that keeps your batteries going. What are the thrills and the rewarding moments in tourism that keep you in this industry? Because certainly there are easier and more lucrative industries.
Well, I mean, for me, it's always been about, my transformational changes, going from a young adult into a regular adult, where I personally realized, the damage we were starting to do. In 1997, I won an award from Sehesti, which is a sort of sustainable development organization here in Costa Rica, for our hotel's sustainability efforts. And I went to the evening with my 10-year-old daughter and my wife to receive the award. And unbeknownst to me, they wanted us to talk a little bit what we were about doing. I had no idea. I hadn't prepared anything. Bruno Stagno, the famous architect, won for his sustainable designs. There's a lot of people there. It was a very big event. And then they said, well, we're going to hear from Glenn Jampol, the co-owner of Finca Rosa Blanca. And I had no idea. What? So I went up and I just started talking about, how we saw tourism developing in Costa Rica and what was important to us, and how saving the planet was something that we all had to start thinking about. And tourism was a huge, part of the gross product here in Costa Rica, and could really add to that. And when I was all done, I was shaking, and I felt like, I don't know if I even made any sense. I sat down, and my 10-year-old daughter turned to me and she said, "I'm so proud of you, Daddy. What else do you need? We have our kids that we have to think about. We've left them a horrible mess. So for us not to do this seems like a blatant smack in the face to the survival of our planet. And there are ways in which we can, develop and regenerate using tourism, which is a great attraction all over the world. And there are travel companies like yours, Casey, and others who are really considerate about this. You know, G Adventures, for example, they hold this thing that they call the Ripple score. I don't know if you've heard about that. They're working with Planetara and Jamie Sweeting and STI about this. And it's like a traceability program where it gives travelers and tourists a chance to see how much money is staying in the local community rather than leakage outside and leaving. And the higher the Ripple score, the more money stays. And Intrepid Travel from Australia, who's now in the US, are doing interesting things. You know, here in Costa Rica, Namu and others are dedicating a lot of their spirit and time and money into trying to, you know, benefit these local and small industry players. It's out there, and Costa Rica knows how to do it really well as compared to most other countries in the world. So it's not, can we do it? It's just, are we willing to open our eyes and actually make an effort to change the chip of the rest of the world so that they see what we're doing is a really one of the best directions to take.
Completely agree. You know, there's a word that doesn't get thrown around a lot in business, but I think it's particularly relevant at this moment in time, and certainly 6 or 9 months ago when we all went through Tourism Zero, and that's courage. Some of this stuff requires you to be a little bit brave and a little bit bold. And I think you and the other people on the Mount Rushmore of early Costa Rica tourism did a lot of brave stuff. And I think courage is, it's contagious. So the more that we can, the crowd will draw the crowd for the right reasons. And we double and triple down into what made Costa Rica great for the first 30 years. Hopefully we can even deepen that commitment to this uber local, sustainable, small business thing that made Costa Rica so awesome and so unique. We just have to figure out this financial model that's going to allow it to sustain. And I really hope these guys managing these ESG funds realize what could be more environmental and socially progressive than boutique tourism.
Exactly.
It's already out there.
You know, I think the biggest kind of, you know, fake news, mistruth out there is that it's all about competitive pricing.
Right,
and
right.
Pricing has nothing to do with anything.
Dynamic
it's about
pricing.
Value. It's if you satisfy or exceed the expectations of your client, they're never going to talk about price. They're getting what they wanted and what they expected. So it's about value, and value now has to include responsible businesses that are involved in conservation and reversing the CO2 emissions and carbon neutrality and all these other things that are what are the younger generation demands of us. And there's ways to do it, just like you just said. You know, the younger consumers in higher socioeconomic, you know, levels, tour operators, tourism companies can focus on all of these things, differentiate them, and it can become a very strong selling point as a business and will become an intrinsic part of what your offer is.
Last question, Glenn. What is your definition of pura vida?
Pura vida. It's such a great word, and you know, I mean, everybody around the globe gets it. For me, it's being able to sleep well at night, and waking up in the morning and looking out and seeing exactly what we have here in Costa Rica. And, you know, the pura vida idea encompasses everything from your day-to-day waking up happy to the joy of meeting people and the idea of collaborating and understanding that life is a two-way street, and pure life is a sphere, not a straight line.
Great answer. Glenn, always love talking to you. Always
thank you so
gives me a
much.
spring in my step and reminds me why we're doing this. I hope you're doing great. Let's do this again soon.
Yes, thank you for including me, and pura vida.
Thanks, Glenn.
Let's talk tourism.